She didn't scream when he rejected her. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply stood in the middle of the grand hall while an entire kingdom watched, and she absorbed it. The way a woman absorbs something she always, somewhere beneath everything, feared was coming. Her name was Thea LaRue, and the night Ulrich Hawthorne was crowned Alpha King of Thesmar, he looked at her in front of every noble house in the kingdom and told them she was not enough. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was what she carried. Not in her hands, not in her title, in her blood. This is the story of what happened after. The night she left, the man who went with her, and the kingdom that slowly began to understand what its king had thrown away. Some losses announced themselves loudly. This one was quiet. The quiet ones are always the ones that change everything. Chapter 1. The Grand Hall of Thesmar had never been so full. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, black and gold, the colors of House Hawthorne, older than anyone in the room could remember. Candles burned in iron chandeliers above 500 wolves dressed in ceremonial finery, their breath warm against the winter air that pressed through the palace walls. Outside, snow had been falling since midday. Inside, everything burned bright. Thea LaRue stood near the eastern column, where she had been placed by the chamberlain 2 hours earlier. Close enough to be seen, far enough to understand her position. She wore silver. She had chosen it carefully that morning, believing it would matter. Now, standing beneath the chandeliers with the weight of 500 eyes moving across the room, she understood that nothing she had chosen that morning was going to matter at all. At the far end of the hall, Ulrich Hawthorne received his crown. She watched him the way she had always watched him, quietly, from a careful distance, with the particular attention of someone who has spent years memorizing a person they were never quite allowed to touch. He was tall, controlled. His jaw set the way it always was when he was performing certainty for an audience. The crown settled onto his dark hair, and the hall erupted. Thea did not move. The ceremony that followed was precise, practiced. The High Elder spoke of lineage and duty and the strength of Thesmar. Noble houses were recognized in order of rank. Alliances were named. And then, the Elder turned toward the assembled court and spoke the words Thea had been waiting for since dawn. The Alpha King will now present his mate to the kingdom. 500 wolves went still. Ulrich turned. He looked directly at her, the first time all evening, and something moved behind his gray eyes that she could not name. It lasted one breath, perhaps less. Then he looked away. He stepped forward toward the assembled court. His voice, when it came, was even, measured. The voice of a man who had rehearsed every word until they no longer felt like words at all. The bond acknowledged in youth was one of circumstance, not of choice. The kingdom requires strength beside its king, stability, political unity, an heir worthy of succession. The hall was absolutely silent. She is unsuitable for the throne. Thea heard it. Every word. She heard the silence that followed. The particular silence of 500 people deciding simultaneously what expression to arrange their faces into. She felt the moment every eye in the room moved toward her. The curiosity, the pity, the relief on some faces that it was not them standing there. She did not look down. She kept her eyes forward and her hands still at her sides, and she breathed. Slowly, carefully, the way she had learned to breathe through things she could not stop. And she did not give them tears. She would not give them that. The bond was acknowledged in youth. Nothing more. Nothing more. The words did not land immediately. They arrived slowly, the way cold does. First at the edges, then deeper, then all at once until there was nothing left that wasn't cold. 9 years. She had spent 9 years moving through the corridors of this palace, learning its rhythms, making herself useful. making herself small enough not to threaten and present enough not to be forgotten. 9 years of believing that one day the distance between them would close. Nothing more. She did not remember walking back to her chambers. She remembered the corridor. The sound of celebration beginning to rise from the lower halls. Music, voices, the particular noise of a kingdom that had already moved on. She remembered standing at the window above the frozen cliffs, thinking, with remarkable calm, that she had no idea what happened next. The knock came quietly. She didn't turn. "Come in." Maven entered carrying ceremonial silk she would never need. The older woman stopped when she saw Thea still in plain wool, still at the window. "You haven't changed. There seems little reason to." Maven's expression held the exhausted sorrow of someone who had spent the evening watching something terrible happen slowly enough that no one could have stopped it. She set the silk aside. "He hasn't announced anything publicly yet. He already did." The entire hall heard him. Silence settled between them. Outside, snow struck the cliffs in soft volleys. The second knock was different, quieter. And yet somehow it changed the room before the door even opened. Lucius Verdun entered without waiting for permission. He was still in his traveling leathers, black, dusted with snow at the shoulders, a man who had come from somewhere and had not stopped to change before coming here. His silver-gray eyes moved across the room once. They settled on Thea, then briefly on the ceremonial silk folded untouched across the chair. Something passed across his expression that he did not name. "I was told you hadn't left your chambers, and now you've confirmed it." He closed the door. Maven cleared her throat softly and moved toward the exit, because older wolves recognize certain things without needing them explained. The door clicked shut behind her. Lucius remained near the hearth. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You should not stay here tonight." Interesting. That's exactly what Maven said. She's right. He studied her with the particular attention of someone who had been watching carefully for longer than she realized. She usually is. Then, "You're bleeding." Thea looked down. The small cuts across her palms where her nails had pressed in, she hadn't noticed. She wiped them against her skirt. "It doesn't hurt." That was a lie. Everything hurt. The rejection. The bond pulling raw beneath her throat, half severed and half alive. The cruelest possible version of loss. The humiliation of having stood in that hall in silver, believing it would matter. Lucius's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He should never have done this publicly. A sharp sound escaped her. But privately would have been kinder? Yes. He meant it. Simply and without performance, the way he said most things. The fire crackled softly between them. The southern court arrived tonight. Cassian intends to announce a formal engagement within the fortnight. Lady Orella Vane. Something inside her chest seemed to stop. Of course. Lucius watched the devastation move across her face. He did not look away from it. He said, "You need to leave before the announcement." "Where would I go?" "My estate." The words fell softly into the room and changed it completely. "My northern territory. The court rarely travels there in winter. You would have time." "Time for what?" "To decide what comes next. On your terms, not theirs." She stared at him. "You barely know me. That isn't true." The quiet certainty of it unsettled her more than anything else he could have said. "You're his oldest friend." "Yes." A pause. "That doesn't change what he did tonight." The celebration below swelled briefly. Distant music, voices rising. The kingdom rejoicing for its new alpha king, entirely unaware of what was happening one floor above them. Thea closed her eyes. Then she said, "All right." Lucius removed his cloak from his shoulders. He stepped forward and draped it around her. Carefully, without ceremony. the way one might offer warmth to someone who had been cold for a long time without saying so. It smelled of cedar and snow and something steadier than anything she had stood near in years. "Rest," he said quietly. "We leave at dawn." She looked up. "We? I'm not sending you north alone in winter." She almost said something. Instead, she pulled the cloak closer and turned back toward the window, where the snow still fell across the frozen cliffs of Thesmar. Far below, in the burning heart of the palace, Alpha King Ulrich Hawthorne stood beneath the chandeliers of the royal hall, accepting congratulations from the assembled noble houses, when the damaged mate bond pulsed without warning. Sharp, distant, and unmistakably wrapped in another wolf's scent. The wineglass cracked in his hand. Blood ran slowly across his fingers. The hall noticed. He did not, because something far above the celebration had just shifted, quietly, irreversibly. And for the first time in the history of his reign, Ulrich Hawthorne felt something moving away from him that he did not know how to name. He would spend a long time learning its name. By then, it would be too late. By dawn, the palace had become a rumor. Thea did not look back as they rode through the southern gate. She had decided this before mounting, that she would not turn, would not give herself the opportunity, and she kept the decision the way she had kept most decisions in her life. Quietly, without announcement. The towers of Thesmar disappeared first, then the banners, then the walls that had defined the edge of her world for 9 years. Snow swallowed everything. The road north opened ahead of them, pale, unmarked, indifferent, and the only sounds were hoofbeats and wind and the occasional crack of ice in the trees flanking the mountain pass. Lucius rode slightly ahead, not by much. Enough to watch the road without making her feel watched. She noticed that. They did not speak for the first 2 hours. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people carrying more than they had words for, moving through a landscape that asked nothing of either of them. The cold was clean. The sky was the particular pale gray of winter mornings before the light decides what it wants to be. By midday, they stopped beside a frozen stream where an overhang of stone provided shelter from the wind. Lucius dismounted and had a fire going before she finished tying her horse. "You need to eat." She almost smiled. "You sound exactly like Maven. Maven is usually right." He produced rabbit from his pack and built the fire with the same wordless efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. No performance, no commentary. Things simply got done in his vicinity. She sat on a flat stone near the flames. Warmth arrived slowly, working its way through layers of wool and cold. The smell of roasting meat reached her before she realized how hungry she was. When he handed her the first portion without comment, she accepted it, and they ate in silence, while the stream beside them moved sluggishly beneath its skin of ice. "Tell me something." The words escaped before she fully intended them. Lucius glanced up from the fire. "What?" She stared into the flames. "Why did you never marry?" The question surprised both of them. A faint expression moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else. "That's your first question?" "It's the first one I thought of." He considered this with the seriousness he appeared to apply to most things. Then he shrugged lightly. "No particular reason. That's a terrible answer. It's an honest one." She narrowed her eyes. "You're 32. 33. Which makes it worse." A genuine laugh escaped him. Low, unexpected. The sound transformed his face briefly, made him look younger, less burdened. Thea found herself staring before quickly looking away. "The border territories require constant attention," he said. "That can't be the only reason." A pause. He looked toward the frozen stream. Snowflakes settled against dark branches. Then he spoke more quietly. "No, It isn't. She waited. I never met someone I trusted enough. The words settled into the space between them without asking for anything in return. Simple. Precise. Revealing more than he had perhaps intended in the way that honest answers sometimes do. Thea lowered her gaze to the fire. Trust. She turned the word over quietly. It felt like something that belonged to a different world than the one she had spent 9 years navigating. A world where people said what they meant and meant what they offered. That's a rare reason. Most reasons are. They finished eating. He buried the fire with practiced efficiency. She stood and brushed snow from her cloak, his cloak still, the one she had not returned. And when she looked up, he was already checking the horses, his back to her, giving her the particular gift of not being watched while she composed herself. She was beginning to understand that this was deliberate. The afternoon passed in the same rhythm as the morning. Movement, silence. The road winding deeper into the mountain passes where the trees grew dense and the light came in sideways, filtered through snow-heavy branches. Lucius pointed out landmarks occasionally. A ridge, a river crossing, a cluster of stones that marked the boundary of the northern territories. But he did not fill the silence for its own sake. She found herself grateful for that in a way she couldn't fully articulate. It was late afternoon when the estate first appeared. A dark shape against the white valley, solid and low, and entirely without the architectural performance of the palace. No towers built for visibility, no banners asserting presence. Simply a large stone manor settled into the landscape as though it had grown there, surrounded by outbuildings and fenced fields, and the distant line of forest that marked the northern boundary. Wolves emerged as they approached. Servants, guards, stable hands, and something else, something she hadn't expected. Children. A group of them near the eastern fence, and then one. A girl of perhaps 6, dark-haired and entirely fearless, who launched herself directly at Lucius's horse the moment he came within range. "You're late." Lucius caught her effortlessly, lifting her into the saddle in front of him, with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. "I know. You missed midwinter. I know. You owe me 3 stories. 3 seems excessive." The girl considered this with great seriousness. 5 then. 4. Final offer. She appeared to calculate. Acceptable. Thea stared. The fearsome commander of Thesmar's northern border, decorated veteran of a dozen winter campaigns, was negotiating with a 6-year-old, and losing, she suspected, deliberately. He noticed her expression, set the girl down gently, then looked across the distance between them with something in his face she didn't have a name for yet. "Lady Thea," he said quietly, to the child. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Curious green eyes turned toward her. "Is she your friend?" A brief pause. Something moved across Lucius Verdun's face, there and gone, like the light through snow-heavy branches. "Yes," he said. "She is." The word arrived strangely. Friend. After everything. The hall, the silver dress, the cold precision of nothing more. Friend felt like the safest thing anyone had called her in a very long time. Not a position. Not a function. Not a political consideration. A person. Simply that. Thea looked at the manor. At the wolves moving through the yard, with the easy purpose of people who knew their place in something that worked. At the child already pulling Lucius toward the entrance by 2 fingers, talking rapidly about something that had apparently been wrong, with the eastern fence since Tuesday. She took a breath of cold northern air, and for the first time since the grand hall of Thesmar had gone silent around her, she stepped forward. For the first week, Thea expected someone to ask when she was leaving. No one did. Not Lucius, who appeared at meals and disappeared to the border patrols with the regularity of someone whose life had a shape she was only beginning to understand. Not the household staff, who moved around her with the easy efficiency of people who had long ago stopped requiring explanation for things that happened in this house. Not the guards, who nodded when she passed and said nothing else. No one treated her like a guest. No one treated her like an obligation. They simply treated her as though she belonged there. Not because she had earned it, not because she carried a title that demanded it, but because Lucius had brought her home. And in the north, it seemed, that was explanation enough. The realization unsettled her more than hostility would have. She found the kitchens on the third morning before sunrise, drawn by warmth and the smell of wood smoke, when the rest of the manor was still dark. The room was already alive, bread in the stone ovens, iron pots steaming, half a dozen workers moving through organized chaos with the ease of people who had done this 10,000 times, and expected to do it 10,000 more. An older woman looked up from a workbench dusted white with flour. She had the broad shoulders and unhurried eyes of someone who had fed large numbers of people through difficult winters for most of her life. "You're awake early. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Nonsense." She pointed at a stool near the far end of the table with the authority of someone who ruled this room absolutely and knew it. "Sit." Thea sat. Within minutes, a mug appeared. Honey tea, still steaming, followed by bread and butter and a small plate she hadn't noticed being prepared. Pastries dusted with cinnamon sugar, still warm from the oven. She stared at them. "Commander says you like cinnamon," the woman said, without looking up from her dough. Something inside Thea's chest moved in a way she wasn't prepared for. Not grief. Not quite. Something adjacent to grief. The particular ache of discovering that someone noticed a small thing about you that you hadn't noticed them noticing. A preference. A detail with no political value whatsoever. "Thank you." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. The woman smiled. "I'm Edith." "Isolde." She stopped. "Thea." Edith snorted softly. "We know." The answer startled a laugh out of her. Real and unplanned, gone almost before it arrived. But the kitchen caught it. Several workers glanced over, not because she had done anything strange, but because it was apparently the first time any of them had heard it. The sound hung briefly in the warm air above the bread and the wood smoke. Then everyone looked back at what they were doing. Thea sat with her tea and her cinnamon pastry and said nothing more for a long time. She didn't need to. The kitchen moved around her. Competent, warm, entirely unbothered by her presence. And for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, she sat somewhere without calculating what her presence cost. She found trouble, later that morning, near the eastern stables. She heard the noise from across the yard, shouting, then a crash, then the unmistakable sound of a large animal in distress. Years of palace corridors had taught her that shouting usually preceded something worse, and she crossed the yard without deciding to. 3 stable hands surrounded an injured horse. The animal was bleeding from the left foreleg, panicked, moving in tight, violent circles that kept everyone at a distance. One young handler, barely old enough to be working the stables, had positioned himself too close and couldn't find a way back without triggering another kick. Then Lucius was simply there. She didn't see him arrive. He was just present, stepping between the handler and the horse, with the calm of someone who had assessed the situation before anyone else had finished reacting. He said something to the young handler, very quietly. The boy moved. Lucius turned his attention to the horse. He didn't rush it. Didn't assert himself over the animal the way some men did, using size and force to establish who was in charge. He simply stood at the edge of its panic and spoke, low and even, giving the horse time to locate him in the chaos and decide what he was. The horse's breathing slowed. Its circles tightened, then stopped. Lucius moved closer by degrees, a step, then stillness, then another step, until he was close enough to lay one hand against the animal's neck. The trembling beneath his palm gradually eased. Within minutes, he was kneeling beside the injured leg, examining the wound with the same quiet attention he applied to everything. Thea watched from the fence. She had seen powerful men handle animals before. She had seen the kind who used authority like a tool, the way they used most things. This was different. The stable hands had relaxed the moment Lucius appeared. Not because he commanded them to. Not because his rank required it. Because they trusted him. Specifically, completely, without calculation. In the way that people trust someone who has never given them a reason not to. Lots of men are good at things, Edith said quietly, appearing beside her at the fence. He's good at people. Different skill. She left before Thea could answer, moving back toward the kitchens with the unhurried purpose of someone who had said exactly what she meant and needed nothing added to it. Thea stayed at the fence. Lucius had the horse standing quietly now, weight off the injured leg, head low and calm. He was speaking to the young handler. Not correcting, she realized. Teaching. Walking him through what had happened and why, and what to do differently, treating the boy's mistake as information rather than failure. Something settled in her chest, warm and slightly dangerous. She recognized the feeling. She had spent 9 years being careful about feelings exactly like it. The letter arrived that evening. She knew what it was before the messenger said anything. The seal, black wax, the crest of House Hawthorne, announced it across the room. She took it without expression and waited until she was alone in her chamber before she looked at it. The paper was heavy, official, the handwriting precise in the way that suggested it had been composed carefully, perhaps more than once. Lady Thea, I write to you as Alpha King of Tesmar, and as a man who understands that the events of the coronation require acknowledgement beyond what the formal record contains. She stopped reading there. Not because the words were cruel, because they weren't. Because they were measured and correct and written in the voice of a man, trying to address something enormous with the only language he had ever been taught. The language of position, of record, of formal acknowledgement. The language of function. She folded the letter without finishing it. Set it on the table beside the window where the snow was falling again, soft and indifferent, over the dark valley. Then she sat down, pulled Lucius's cloak around her shoulders. She still hadn't returned it, she noticed, and found she didn't particularly want to, and watched the snow until her eyes grew heavy. Tomorrow, she thought. She would decide what to do with it tomorrow. Tonight she was in a house that knew her name. That was enough. The palace had not changed. That was the thing Ulrich noticed most in the days following the coronation. How entirely unchanged everything was. The same corridors. The same council chamber with its long table and its tall windows overlooking the city. The same advisors arriving at the same hours, with the same documents requiring the same decisions. The machinery of Tesmar moved forward with the indifference of something too large to be affected by any single event, however significant it had seemed at the time. He had expected to feel settled. He felt nothing of the kind. The bond was the worst of it. Not painful. He had been prepared for pain. What he hadn't been prepared for was the persistent, low-frequency awareness of distance, like a sound heard through walls, like the memory of warmth in a room that had grown cold. It didn't demand attention. It simply occupied space, quietly, at the edge of everything else he was trying to think about. He slept badly. He said nothing about it. Orella Vane arrived on the 4th day. He received her in the formal reception hall, the correct room for the occasion, the correct dress, the correct arrangement of attendants. She entered with the composure of someone who had been prepared for difficult situations her entire life, and had decided at some early point that composure was the only response worth having. She was not what he had expected. He wasn't certain what he had expected. She sat across from him at the reception table, and accepted tea, and looked at him with dark, unhurried eyes that reminded him, uncomfortably, of someone who was doing arithmetic. "Your Majesty," she said, "you look like a man who hasn't slept. I appreciate your directness, Lady Orella. I imagine you don't get very much of it." She set her cup down. I've been told the things one is supposed to say in this situation. I thought I would spare us both. He studied her. And what would you say instead? That I understand what this arrangement is. That I have no illusions about the circumstances that created it. A pause, precise and unhurried. And that I intend to conduct myself with dignity, regardless of what those circumstances are. Ulrich said nothing for a moment. That seems, he said finally, like a reasonable position. It's the only one available to either of us. She picked up her cup again. I thought you should know I hold it. She did not mention Thea. She did not need to. The name existed between them in the particular way that important things exist when no one is saying them. Present, acknowledged, carefully left alone. When she left an hour later, Ulrich remained at the table for a long time. He thought, she deserved better than this situation. And she knew it. The council met 3 days later. Standard agenda, border reports, trade negotiations, the Northern Patrol assessments that Lucius had filed before his departure. Ulrich moved through the items, with the efficiency of someone who had been trained since childhood to keep the machinery running regardless of personal circumstance. Then, Lord Aldrich Crane set a document on the table. There is one additional matter, Crane said. He had the careful voice of a man who had spent decades learning how to say difficult things in rooms full of powerful people. Given the change in succession arrangements, the council believes it would be appropriate to begin formal consultations regarding the position of Luna. Ulrich looked at the document. He did not pick it up. We have identified several candidates from appropriate bloodlines. The Merith family has expressed interest. Lady Senna Merith is 19, well-regarded, healthy lineage. There is also the matter of House Calloway. Their eldest daughter completed her formal education last autumn. The council waited. Ulrich was aware, distantly, of the document in front of him, of the names being spoken, of the particular quality of silence that fills a room when powerful men are waiting for a response they believe is straightforward. What arrived instead was not a thought. It was a sensation, sudden, involuntary, located somewhere beneath rational process entirely. A kind of resistance that moved through him before he could identify it, or name it, or decide what to do with it. The image of another woman sitting where Thea had been positioned for 9 years. Another name attached to that role. Another face receiving what had always been. He became aware that his hand had closed into a fist beneath the table. He opened it deliberately. Slowly. Not yet, he said. Crane blinked. Your Majesty. The succession arrangements were formalized 4 days ago. We will not be conducting Luna consultations within a fortnight of the coronation. His voice was even, controlled, the voice of a man who had rehearsed evenness until it became reflex. Schedule it for the second council of spring. A pause moved around the table. Of course, Crane said carefully. As you wish. The meeting continued. Ulrich contributed where required and heard approximately half of what was said. That evening he sat alone in his private study, with a blank sheet of paper in front of him for a long time. The formal letter he had sent to Thea 4 days ago had been correct in every particular. Appropriate language, appropriate acknowledgement. The kind of letter that fulfilled an obligation without saying anything that could be used against him. He knew, sitting here now, that it had been entirely wrong. He picked up his pen. He set it down. He picked it up again. What he wanted to say had no formal language. It existed somewhere below the vocabulary he had spent his entire life constructing, below duty and protocol, and the careful architecture of kingship. It was the thing the council meeting had cracked open without warning. The involuntary fist beneath the table. The resistance that arrived before thought. He wrote, Thea. Just that. Her name without title, without preamble. He stared at it for a long time. Then he continued. The letter I sent you was the letter I knew how to write. This one is different. I am not certain I know how to write it, which may be why it has taken me 4 days to begin. I am not asking you to return. I am not writing to you as Alpha King. I am writing because there are things that should be said by a person, not a position. And I have spent enough time recently discovering that I do not always know the difference. He did not finish it that night, but he did not put it away. Outside, snow moved across the palace terraces in soft spirals. Somewhere to the north, several hundred miles away, the damaged mate bond pulsed quietly, steady, distant, and carrying, unmistakably, the particular warmth of someone who had finally, for the first time in a long time, stopped being cold. Ulrich felt it. He pressed his hand flat against the desk, and for the first time since the coronation, Alpha King Ulrich Hawthorne allowed himself to think a thought he had no political use for whatsoever. I should have known her better. Not, I made a strategic error. Not, the succession requires correction. Just that. Simple. Too late and entirely true. He picked up his pen and kept writing. Before we continue, if you felt something in this first chapter that made you want to stay, please subscribe to the channel. It takes 1 second, and it means a lot to me. Chapter 2. He arrived on a Tuesday, which Thea would later think was exactly the kind of detail that made certain things feel real. Not a significant day, not a ceremonial one. A Tuesday in the middle of an ordinary week, when the snow had softened slightly, and the valley beyond the estate held the particular pale light of winter moving, almost imperceptibly, toward something else. She was in the small library off the eastern corridor. She had discovered it on her 5th day, and had been returning every morning since, quietly, in the way she had always moved toward books when the rest of the world required too much, when Lucius appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here who asked for you specifically." She looked up. "For me?" "By name." A pause. "He says he's been waiting for the right moment." The old man was seated in the front receiving room as though he had always been there, small, precise, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago. That patience was not the absence of urgency, but its most disciplined form. His hands rested on a worn leather satchel in his lap. His eyes, when they found her, were the eyes of someone who recognized her. Not her face. Her. "Lady Thea LaRue," he said. Not a question. "Yes. I am Aldous Vane." He said it simply, without performance. "I was keeper of the ancestral records for House Aurelian for 41 years. I made a promise, when those records were sealed, that I would deliver what I carry to the right person at the right moment." His hands settled more firmly on the satchel. "I believe that moment has arrived." Thea looked at Lucius. He was watching her, not the old man her, with the careful attention of someone who would follow whatever she decided. She sat down across from Aldous Vane. "Tell me," she said. He spoke for a long time. She listened the way she had always listened to things that mattered, without interruption, without the urge to argue or correct, simply receiving. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the valley held its pale winter light. House Aurelian, he told her, had not ended. It had been hidden. 3 generations back, when the political alignment of Thesmar had shifted and the old bloodlines had become inconvenient to the new order, the last daughter of Aurelian had been given quietly to a lesser house. Her name changed, her lineage sealed, the records locked under a promise that they would only be opened when the cost of concealment outweighed the cost of truth. "Your grandmother," Aldous said. She knew. She chose the concealment deliberately, to protect what came after her. She did not believe the moment had arrived in her lifetime, nor in your mother's. His eyes held hers steadily. She believed it would arrive in yours. Thea sat very still. "What does it mean?" she asked. "The bloodline. What does it actually mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that the throne of Thesmar has a legal and ancestral obligation to House Aurelian that predates House Hawthorne by 2 centuries. It means that any child of your line carries a claim to legitimate succession that no coronation can simply overwrite." A pause. "It means that Ulrich Hawthorne rejected his mate without knowing that she was not merely suitable for his throne. She was, by ancestral right, its other half." The room was very quiet. Thea looked at the fire. She had expected, she realized, to feel something dramatic. Vindication, perhaps. Or rage. The clean, clarifying kind that arrives when an injustice is finally named. Instead, what she felt was something slower and stranger. Like watching a shape emerge from fog that had always been there, that she had always moved through without being able to see it. She had always had value, not because of a bloodline, not because of a legal obligation or an ancestral record. She had always had value in the way that people have value, simply, completely, without requiring documentation. But the world had never let her know it. And the man who should have known it most had looked at her in front of 500 wolves and decided, with royal precision, that she wasn't enough. "He didn't know," she said quietly. "Not a question." "No," Aldous said. "He did not. The records were sealed. His advisors may have suspected. There are those who would have had reason to look. But Ulrich Hawthorne rejected you without knowing what he rejected. She absorbed this. It didn't make it smaller. It made it different. A wound inflicted in ignorance rather than calculation, which was its own particular shape of terrible. A man who had destroyed something without understanding its value was not a cruel man. He was a blind one. She wasn't certain, sitting here, which was harder to forgive. Aldous left the satchel with her. Records, documents, seals, 40 years of careful preservation handed across a small table in a northern manor on a Tuesday. He shook her hand with both of his, held it for a moment, and said nothing more. Some things, his expression communicated clearly, had been said. After he left, Thea sat alone for a long time. Then Lucius came back. He didn't ask. He sat in the chair across from her, the one Aldous had occupied, and waited in the particular way he had of waiting that never felt like pressure. "Did you know?" she asked. "No." She looked at him. "If you had, I would have told you. Immediate. Unequivocal. Whatever it cost." She believed him. That was the thing. She simply believed him. Without calculation. Without the exhausting process of trying to determine what someone's honesty was worth and what it was performing. It arrived like the cinnamon pastry had arrived. Like the cloak. Like a friend. Spoken to a 6-year-old without hesitation. He didn't reach for the satchel. Didn't ask what it contained or what it meant for succession, or what she intended to do with it. He simply sat with her in the room, where something enormous had just happened. And he was present, and that was everything. "It doesn't change anything," she said finally. "Between us." He looked at her steadily. "It doesn't change anything," he agreed. Something shifted between them in the quiet. Small, irrevocable, the particular movement of 2 people crossing a threshold neither had named aloud. She looked away first. He let her. That evening, a messenger left the Verdun estate riding south. He carried a sealed document, in the inner pocket of his riding coat. The seal was old, older than most of the noble houses currently sitting on the Thesmar Council. The wax was deep gold. The crest pressed into it was a half-moon above a field of wheat. The crest of House Aurelian. The messenger rode through the night. The snow had stopped. The road south was clear and cold and entirely indifferent to what it was carrying. In the capital, Ulrich Hawthorne was still awake. He did not yet know why he should be. It did not happen loudly. That was the thing about power shifting. The real kind. Not the ceremonial kind that happened beneath chandeliers with 500 witnesses. The real kind moved quietly, through letters and glances and conversations that stopped when certain people entered rooms. It moved through the small adjustments that people made when they began, privately, to recalculate. The first sign came from House Meredith. Lord Crane mentioned it in passing, at the end of a council session, in the careful tone of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be associated with. Lady Senna Meredith, the 19-year-old whose name had been raised as a Luna candidate, had apparently developed a sudden interest in her family's northern trade routes. Her father had requested a meeting with the Verdun estate steward. Routine, Crane said. Probably nothing. Ulrich said nothing. The second sign came from House Pelworth. An invitation declined. A feast postponed. A daughter who had been promised to attend the spring coronation celebrations, suddenly unavailable due to unspecified family obligations. The third sign was not subtle at all. Lord Aldrich Crane placed a sealed document on the council table on a gray Thursday morning and said, with the expression of a man diffusing something explosive, "The seal of House Aurelian has been identified in correspondence originating from the Northern Territories." The council chamber went very still. "Aurelian," said Lord Pembroke slowly, as though the word required careful handling. "That line was sealed 3 generations ago." "Apparently," Crane said, "it was not ended." Ulrich read the report twice. Then he set it down and looked at the window for a long time. House Aurelian. He knew the name, the way every Alpha King of Thesmar knew it, as history, as precedent, as the bloodline that had preceded his own house's rise, and whose legal claim to succession had never been formally extinguished. Simply set aside, simply made inconvenient, and then made quiet. He thought about the night of the coronation, about the precise language he had used, unsuitable for the throne. He thought about 9 years of corridors and council meetings, and the particular way she had always moved through rooms, carefully, taking up as little space as possible, as though she had learned early that visibility was a liability. He thought about a woman who had spent 9 years making herself small enough not to threaten, who had been, the entire time, the other half of his throne's legitimacy. The report blurred slightly at the edges. "Your Majesty." Crane's voice was careful. "The Council believes a formal response is required. If the Aurelian claim is substantiated, it will be substantiated." Ulrich's voice came out quiet. "Certain. We both know that." A pause. Then the question becomes... "The question," Ulrich said, "is not one for this council." He stood. "I will require 2 days." He left before anyone could object. He found Arella in the east garden. She was walking alone along the frozen path that ran beside the dormant rosebeds, her breath visible in the cold air, her dark cloak moving slowly against the gray morning. She looked, he thought, like a woman who had developed the habit of finding space to think in places where no one would follow her. He fell into step beside her without announcing himself. She didn't startle. He suspected she had heard him coming and chosen not to react. They walked in silence for a moment. "You've read the report," she said. Not a question. "Yes. And?" He considered the question with more honesty than he usually permitted himself in conversation. "And I understand something now that I should have understood before." Arella stopped walking. She turned to look at him with the dark, unhurried eyes that had unsettled him at their first meeting. The eyes of someone doing arithmetic, arriving at answers she had no obligation to share. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "That you will not enjoy hearing? You've been doing that since you arrived." Almost a smile. "I knew about the Aurelian connection," she said. "Not the details, but enough. My family has old records. Old enough to know that the bloodline hadn't ended, only hidden." Ulrich went still. I said nothing, she continued evenly, because it wasn't my information to give, and because I believed when I arrived here that you were the kind of man who made decisions based on what he understood rather than what he felt. A pause. I have been revising that assessment. In which direction? She looked at him for a long moment. You should go to the north, Your Majesty. The council believes a political response. I am not speaking as a political consideration. Her voice was precise and entirely without cruelty. I am speaking as a woman who has watched you spend 3 weeks failing to sleep, failing to concentrate, and failing to write a letter you clearly need to finish. She held his gaze steadily. Go. Not for the throne, not for the succession, not for Thesmar. A breath. For her. The garden was very quiet around them. And us? He asked. Aurella's expression carried the particular dignity of someone who had accepted a difficult situation with more grace than it deserved. I told you when I arrived, she said. I intend to conduct myself with dignity regardless of circumstances. That remains true. She paused. What I did not tell you is that dignity does not require pretending something is other than what it is. Her eyes held his. Go, Ulrich. Whatever comes after, we will manage it. We are both capable of that. She resumed walking before he could answer. He stood in the frozen garden and watched her go. Composed, unhurried, entirely herself, and thought. She deserved better than this situation. She had known it from the beginning, and she had conducted herself accordingly. He went inside and finished the letter. That evening, he rode north. He arrived in the early morning. Thea was in the library when she heard the horses in the yard, 2 of them, moving fast, then stopping. She did not go to the window immediately. She sat with her book for a moment longer than necessary, the way a person sits with something familiar, before walking toward something they cannot predict. Then she set the book down and went to the window. He was dismounting in the yard below. No ceremonial guard, no formal announcement. Just Ulrich Hawthorne in a dark riding coat dusted with snow, handing his reins to a stable hand with the quiet efficiency of someone who had ridden through the night and intended to be taken seriously despite it. He looked up. She stepped back from the window before he could see her. Lucius found her in the corridor 10 minutes later. He's here, he said. Not a question. I know. He studied her for a moment. His expression held the particular quality she had come to recognize over these weeks. Attentive, steady, entirely without agenda. You don't have to see him. I know that too. A pause. But you're going to. She looked at him. I need to hear what he came to say. Not for him. She held his gaze. For me. Something moved across Lucius's face. Something she couldn't fully name, though she was beginning to have language for the things that moved across his face. He nodded once. I'll be here, he said. Simply that. She went downstairs. Ulrich was waiting in the front receiving room. Standing, not sitting, the posture of someone who had decided against making himself comfortable in a space that wasn't his. He turned when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked different than she remembered. Not diminished. She hadn't expected that, and it hadn't happened. But something in him was less composed than it had been in the grand hall of Thesmar. Less managed. The careful architecture of his expression had developed, somewhere between the capital and here, small fractures that he wasn't bothering to repair. She remained near the door. You rode through the night, she said. Yes, that wasn't necessary. I know. A pause. I came anyway. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, snow had begun falling again. The quiet kind, without wind. The manor was very still around them. There are things I need to say, Ulrich said. I would ask you to hear them. Not as Alpha King. not as a political consideration. His jaw tightened slightly, as a man who did something he cannot undo, speaking to the person he did it to. Thea said nothing. She waited. He did not look away from her. That was different, too. In the grand hall, he had avoided her eyes until the last possible moment. Now he held her gaze with the deliberate attention of someone who had decided that looking away was no longer something he was permitted to do. "I rejected you," he said, "because I believed what I had been told, that the kingdom required strength, that political unity demanded a different alliance, that the bond acknowledged in youth was sentiment, not substance, a breath. I believed those things because I had been shaped to believe them, because the men around me had spent years making certain I would." His voice remained even. "That is not an excuse. It is the truth of how it happened. You deserve the truth of how it happened." "I know how it happened," Thea said quietly. Something flickered across his face. "The Aurelian records. This isn't about the records." Her voice was steady. "I knew before the records, Ulrich. I knew that I had value, not because of bloodline, not because of legal claim." She held his gaze. "I knew because someone here treated me as though I did. That's what the records confirmed. Not my worth. My worth was never the question." He absorbed this. "Then what is the question?" he asked. She considered him for a long moment. The man in front of her was not the man who had stood beneath the ancestral banners of House Hawthorne and spoken with royal precision about suitability and succession. That man had been a function, perfectly performed, entirely controlled. This man had ridden through the night with fractures in his expression that he wasn't bothering to repair. She found, examining the difference, that it didn't change what she knew. "The question," she said, "is who I am now. And the answer is not who I was when you made your decision." A pause. "The woman you rejected spent 9 years making herself small enough not to threaten. She believed, somewhere beneath everything, that your assessment of her might be correct. She kept her voice even. That woman is gone. She left the capital the morning after the coronation, and she did not come back." Ulrich said nothing. "I don't say that to punish you," Thea continued. "I say it because it's true, and you came here for truth." She looked at him. Really looked, the way she had always wanted to, and never allowed herself. "You made a catastrophic error. I believe you understand that now. I believe you are sorry." A breath. "And I cannot give you forgiveness as though it resolves something, because what you did didn't just hurt me. It changed me. And the woman I became in the changing is not a woman who goes back." The room held the silence for a long moment. "I'm not asking you to go back," Ulrich said. His voice had lost something, the last of the managed quality, the final layer of performance. What remained underneath was quieter. "I came because there were things that needed to be said by a person, not a position. I have said them." A pause. "What you do with them belongs to you." Thea looked at him. For the first time in 9 years, she looked at Ulrich Hawthorne without the complicated weight of loving him, without the exhausting mathematics of hope and disappointment and careful invisibility. She looked at him simply, as one person looks at another when the story between them has finally become what it actually was, rather than what either of them needed it to be. She saw a man who had been blind, who had stopped being blind too late, who had ridden through the night to say so, not because it would change anything, but because it was true, and she deserved to hear it. "I know," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming." It was not forgiveness. It was not cruelty. It was something more precise than either. The acknowledgement of a truth spoken by someone who no longer needed it to be anything other than what it was. Ulrich nodded once. He moved toward the door. stopped with his hand on the frame, did not turn around. "He's good," he said. "Lucius. He always was." A pause that held more weight than most sentences. "I'm glad it's him." Then he left. Thea stood alone in the receiving room for a long time. The fire crackled. The snow fell outside. The manor was quiet around her. In the particular way it had been quiet since her first morning here. Not empty, not waiting. Simply present. She became aware, gradually, of Lucius in the doorway. He had not come in. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, and his expression doing the thing it did when he was giving her space while remaining entirely available. The gift of not being watched extended now into the gift of not being rushed. She looked at him across the room. "He said you were good," she said. "I know." A pause. "I heard." "Were you listening at the door?" "I was standing near the door." The corner of his mouth moved. "There's a difference." A sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, not one. Something that belonged to the woman she was becoming rather than the woman she had been. She crossed the room. She didn't say anything when she reached him. She simply stood close enough that the warmth of him reached her, and she looked up, and he looked down, and the space between them held everything the conversation had cost, and everything that came after cost, and everything that was, finally, simply theirs. "I'm not going back," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm staying." He looked at her for a long moment, the particular attention of someone who has been paying attention for longer than she knew. "I know," he said again, quietly. "I was hoping you'd say it." She reached up and touched the collar of his coat. The same coat she had first seen dusted with snow on the night of the coronation, and something settled in her chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Outside, Ulrich Hawthorne mounted his horse in the yard below and rode south without looking back. The snow fell quietly over the Verdun estate. The north held everything it always had. 3 days after Ulrich rode south, Thea asked Lucius to call the household together. Not the pack in the political sense. Not the noble houses or the council or the wolves of Thesmar, who were quietly recalculating their loyalties. Simply the people of the Verdun estate. The stable hands and the kitchen staff and the guards and the families who lived and worked within these walls. The people who had learned her name without being asked to. Lucius looked at her for a moment when she said it. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what she intended to say or whether she had thought it through or whether she wanted more time. He simply nodded and went to arrange it, because this was what he did. He trusted her to know her own mind. And then he made space for it. She spent the morning in the library, not reading, sitting with the satchel Aldous had left, the records, the seals, the careful documentation of a bloodline that had waited 3 generations for the right moment. She held the Aurelian ring in her palm for a long time. Old gold, worn smooth at the edges. The half-moon crest pressed into it, patient as stone. She was not thinking about succession. She was thinking about a woman who had spent 9 years making herself small, who had learned to move through rooms without disturbing the air, who had stood in a grand hall in silver and absorbed a public destruction without giving anyone the satisfaction of her tears. That woman had deserved better, and she was going to say so. They gathered in the main courtyard as the afternoon light moved low and gold across the snow. Perhaps 40 wolves in total, not a grand assembly, not a ceremonial occasion. Simply the people of this place, standing in the cold with their breath visible in the air, waiting with the particular patience of people who trusted the man who had called them together. Lucius stood to one side, not at the front, not positioned as authority, simply present, the way he was always simply present, available, steady, entirely without performance. Thea stood at the center. She had not worn silver. She had chosen the deep green wool she had bought from the village market 2 weeks ago, the one she had selected because she liked it, because it was warm, because it was hers. No title. No ceremonial significance. Simply a color she had chosen for herself. She looked at the faces in front of her. Edith near the back, flower still on her hands. The young stable handler who had been nearly trampled by the injured horse. The 6-year-old girl who had negotiated Lucius into 4 stories and was currently watching proceedings from her father's shoulders with the expression of someone taking careful notes. "I want to tell you something," Thea said. Her voice carried clearly in the cold air. Not as Lady LaRue, not as a political consideration, or a succession question, or an Aurelian bloodline. As a person who arrived at this estate 3 weeks ago with nothing except a borrowed cloak and more damage than she knew how to measure. The courtyard was very still. "You gave me something here that I did not know I was missing." She kept her voice even. "You knew my name before I told you. You left cinnamon on my plate because someone had noticed I liked it. You looked at me like I was simply here. Present. Belonging. A breath. I had forgotten what that felt like. I want you to know that I remember now." No one spoke. The afternoon light lay gold and unhurried across the snow. "I am staying," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because the political situation requires it. Not because of blood or bond or any other structure that exists outside of what I actually feel." She looked at the faces in front of her. These specific faces. This specific place. "I am staying because this is where I want to be, because I chose it, and because choosing felt like something I had almost forgotten how to do." She stopped. In the silence that followed, Lucius stepped forward. He moved through the gathered wolves with the quiet directness of someone who had made a decision long before this moment, and was only now finding the right moment to make it visible. He stopped beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He didn't make a speech. Lucius Verdun had never been a man who made speeches. He turned to face the assembled household, the people who trusted him, who had followed him through border winters and difficult seasons and the particular loneliness of the northern territories. And he said, in the voice he used when he meant something completely, "Lady Thea LaRue is under my protection. My roof. My care." A pause, brief and total. "My choice. Not a declaration of political alliance. Not a formal claim in the language of pack hierarchy or succession law. Something older than that, and more irrevocable. The statement of a man who had decided, in full awareness of everything it cost, that this was where he stood. The courtyard absorbed it. Then Edith began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, with the authority of a woman who ruled kitchens and understood exactly what she was doing. One by one, the others followed. The stable hands, the guards, the families. The 6-year-old on her father's shoulders clapped with the wholehearted enthusiasm of someone who had decided this was excellent news and saw no reason to be subtle about it. Thea looked at Lucius. He was watching her with the expression she had been learning to read over these weeks, steady, attentive, carrying something careful and enormous that he had been patient enough to wait until it had a place to go. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers without hesitation. Warm. Certain. The grip of someone who had waited for exactly this, and intended to hold it now that it had arrived. She did not look toward the southern road. She didn't need to. At the edge of the estate, where the northern road met the tree line, a single rider had stopped. Ulrich Hawthorne sat motionless on his horse in the long shadows of the afternoon. He watched the courtyard from a distance too great to hear the words, but close enough to understand what he was seeing. Thea standing at the center. Lucius moving to her side. The gathered household responding to something. He couldn't hear it, only see the movement of it, the particular quality of a moment that was also a threshold. He watched Lucius take her hand. He watched her not look south. He sat with that for one long moment. Then he turned his horse south and rode. Spring came to the north quietly. Not all at once. It never did, this far from the capital. It arrived in increments. A morning where the cold had less intention behind it. A week where the light stayed longer than it had any right to. The snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first, then the valley floor, then the fields where the estate workers had already begun preparing the ground for what came next. Thea noticed all of it. This was new. Or rather, it was old. The kind of attention she had possessed as a child before years of palace corridors had taught her to keep her eyes on what was politically relevant. She noticed the light. She noticed the particular smell of the air when the frost began to loosen its hold on the soil. She noticed things that had no strategic value whatsoever, and found that this was, in itself, a form of freedom she had not expected to feel so soon. She was in the East Garden one morning when Lucius found her. She had her hands in the soil, helping Edith's granddaughter with something that had started as a lesson about planting, and become, gradually, simply the two of them moving dirt around in a companionable silence that required no explanation. Lucius crouched beside her without ceremony. "Letter from the capital," he said. She looked at him. He held it out. The hawthorn seal, black wax, familiar. She took it, held it for a moment. Then she set it aside on the stone border of the garden bed. "Later," she said. He looked at her, almost smiled. "Later," he agreed. He stayed beside her in the dirt for a while. Not because there was anything requiring his attention in that garden. Because she was there, and that had become, quietly and without announcement, reason enough. At some point, the letter slipped entirely from her thoughts. She became aware of this gradually. The way you become aware of silence after a long noise. The hawthorn seal sitting on the stone border of the garden bed, indifferent to its own importance, while she pressed soil around the base of something small and green that Edith's granddaughter was explaining with great seriousness needed to be packed firmly, or it wouldn't take. She looked at Lucius. He was watching the girl explain, with the expression he had when he was paying attention to something he had no intention of interrupting. Thea reached over and set the letter in his hand without looking at him. He took it, turned it once, set it on the stone beside him, unopened, and returned his attention to the lesson on soil. She almost smiled. Later, she thought. They would read it later. Together, probably, over tea, in the library where she had begun leaving her books beside his without either of them remarking on it. The girl finished her explanation and looked up for approval. "Very good," Lucius said seriously. "Pack it firmly." The girl packed it firmly. The morning continued. In the capital, the letter Thea had set aside contained 3 sentences. The formal recognition of the Aurelian bloodline had been entered into the ancestral record of Thesmar. The succession implications were under council review. No further correspondence on the matter would be initiated from the crown unless requested. Ulrich had written it himself. He had rewritten it 4 times. The 5th version was the one he sent, the shortest, the most precise, the one that said what needed to be said, and nothing that didn't. He set down his pen and looked at the window for a long moment. Then he went to find Aurella. She was in the library. She had claimed it quietly in the week since his return, filling its shelves with her own books, making it hers with the same unhurried competence she applied to everything. She looked up when he entered, set her book down without being asked. "It's done," he said. "I know." She had known before he did, probably. She usually did. "How are you?" The question was simple, direct. The kind Aurella always asked, because she had decided early that the only conversations worth having were honest ones. He considered it with the seriousness it deserved. "I am," he said finally. beginning to understand the difference between a kingdom and a life. A pause. I believe I have governed the first adequately. I am less certain about the second. Orella looked at him for a long moment. That, she said, is the most honest thing you have said to me since I arrived. Something shifted between them. Small, careful, the particular movement of two people who have been honest with each other long enough to begin, tentatively, to trust it. I think, Ulrich said, that we might manage this, if you're willing. I told you when I arrived, Orella said. I intend to conduct myself with dignity. A breath. I have also decided that dignity and warmth are not mutually exclusive. It simply took me some time to determine whether you were worth the warmth. And she picked up her book again. The corner of her mouth moved. Barely, precisely. Ask me again in a year. Some stories end with fire. Declarations and ultimatums and grand gestures visible from across the room. The kind of ending that arrives loudly, that leaves no question about what it was. This one ended with dirt on her hands. With a letter set aside on the border of a garden bed because it could wait, and she had learned, was still learning, that some things could wait without losing their meaning. That choosing slowly was still choosing. That a life built in increments, morning by morning, with your hands in the soil, and someone beside you who had no reason to be there except that they wanted to be. That this was not a consolation. It was the thing itself. Lucius Verdun never made a speech about what Thea LaRue meant to him. He didn't need to. He had said it in the only language that had ever meant anything. In presence, in patience, in the small daily decision to remain. The kingdom of Thesmar recorded the Aurelian bloodline in its ancestral register that spring. The council debated its implications for 2 full sessions before finding, quietly, that the woman in question had no interest in their debate. She was in the north. She was staying. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen by the right person. Thea LaRue learned in the end that the more important thing, the thing that changed everything, was learning to choose herself first. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If this story stayed with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I truly love hearing from you. And if you want more stories, subscribe, be part of my library. A new story is always waiting. I'll see you in the next one.